October 3rd, 1849. Baltimore, Maryland. It is raining. A printer named Joseph Walker is making his way to Gunner's Hall, a tavern on Lombard Street that is serving, as many taverns did in 19th century America, as a polling location for the 4th Ward election. He is in a hurry. He is not looking for anything unusual. He finds something unusual anyway. In the gutter outside Gunner's Hall, or inside the tavern, accounts differ. There is a man. He is semi-conscious. He is delirious. He is wearing clothes that do not belong to him. Cheap, shabby, ill-fitting. The clothes of someone much poorer and less careful about his appearance. His shoes do not match his coat. Nothing about him is right. Walker crouches down and looks at the man's face. He recognizes him immediately. Walker writes a note, hastily, on the spot, and sends it to a doctor named Joseph Snodgrass, who is also an editor and a friend of the man in the gutter. The note reads, "There is a gentleman, rather the worse for wear, at Ryan's 4th Ward polls, who goes under the cognomen of Edgar Allan Poe, and who appears in great distress, and he says he is acquainted with you. He is in need of immediate assistance. Edgar Allan Poe, the man who invented the detective story, the man who wrote The Murders in the Rue Morgue, the first modern detective fiction published 8 years earlier, the man who created C. Auguste Dupin, the brilliant analyst who solved crimes through pure reason. The man who invented the genre of the mystery was lying in the gutter, wearing a stranger's clothes, on election day, outside a polling station. He would be dead in 4 days. And the mystery of how he got there has never been solved. He had left Richmond, Virginia, 6 days earlier. He was supposed to go to Philadelphia. He never arrived. Between September 27th and October 3rd, 6 days, there is nothing. No one who saw him. No account of where he went. A complete blank in the life of the most famous writer in America. Snodgrass arrived at Gunner's Hall and found Poe in a state he described as beastly intoxication. He took one look and had him transported to Washington College Hospital. The doctor who attended him there, John Joseph Moran, later wrote that Poe was in a tremor of the limbs and talking wildly. He had no visitors. He gave no coherent account of himself. When he was briefly lucid, he called out the name Reynolds, repeatedly, desperately, and no one who heard it knew who Reynolds was or why the name mattered. On the morning of October 7th, 1849, Edgar Allan Poe died. He was 40 years old. His last words, recorded by Moran, were, "Lord, help my poor soul." The death certificate listed the cause of death as phrenitis, inflammation of the brain. This was a catch-all diagnosis that meant, essentially, that the physician did not know what had killed him. The medical record was sparse. The attending physician's notes were later shown to contain inconsistencies. Moran gave different accounts of Poe's final days in different letters and publications over the following decades. His credibility has been questioned by Poe scholars ever since. Now let me tell you what we know about the 6 missing days. On September 27th, Poe left Richmond, Virginia. He was in good spirits. By all accounts, his mood was excellent. He had recently given a successful lecture. He was engaged to be married to his first love, Elmira Royster Shelton, whom he had known since childhood. He was planning a new literary magazine. He had visited a doctor the night before his departure for a fever, but had been cleared to travel. He was supposed to take a ferry to Baltimore, then continue to Philadelphia and eventually New York. He arrived in Baltimore on September 28th. That much is confirmed. After that, nothing. 5 days of silence. 5 days with no confirmed sightings, no letters, no accounts. And then, the gutter, the wrong clothes, the 4 days of delirium, the death. At least 26 theories have been published attempting to explain what happened. Cholera. Rabies. From one of his cats, a 1996 analysis in the Maryland Medical Journal concluded this was the most likely medical cause. Hypoglycemia, a brain tumor, syphilis, heavy metal poisoning, epilepsy, or, and this is the one that fits the specific facts most precisely, cooping. Cooping was real, it was documented, it was happening in Baltimore on exactly the day Poe was found, and it would explain the one fact that no medical theory adequately addresses: the clothes that did not belong to him. Cooping was a form of electoral fraud common in American cities in the mid-19th century. It worked as follows. A gang of political operatives, employed by or affiliated with a candidate or party, would identify a man on the street. A lone traveler, a man who looked disoriented or drunk or simply unlucky. They would take him, by force, by deception, or with the help of drugged alcohol, to a building, a cellar usually, sometimes literally a chicken coop, which is where the practice got its name. There they would hold him. They would keep him confused with alcohol or laudanum. They would dress him in different clothes, different disguises for each round of voting. And they would take him again and again to different polling stations across the ward, where he would cast a ballot under a different name each time. The Baltimore newspapers on October 3rd, 1849, the day Poe was found, published warnings about exactly this practice. The Republican and Argus ran a notice. Our opponents are at their old game again. Coups have been started by them. Let us all be on the alert. The 4th Ward, where Gunners Hall was located, where Poe was found, was specifically named as a target area for illegal voting. Edgar Allan Poe arrived in Baltimore on September 28th. 5 days later, he was found outside a polling station on Election Day, wearing someone else's clothes, barely conscious, delirious. He was known in Baltimore. His family had lived there, he had worked there. He was not anonymous, but he had been away for years. A man who knew his face might hesitate. A gang in a hurry, in the dark, might not recognize a famous writer. William Hand Brown, a Baltimore man who knew Poe's circle, wrote to Poe's biographer more than a decade after the death. The general belief here is that Poe was seized by one of these gangs, cooped, stupefied with liquor, dragged out and voted, and then turned adrift to die. This was not a fringe theory. It was, for decades, the standard explanation given in Poe's biographies. But Poe was famous. Baltimore was not a large city. The likelihood that a gang of political operatives would fail to recognize the most celebrated writer in America is not zero, but it is not comfortable either. And the medical evidence for rabies is genuinely compelling. The 1996 analysis noted that the pattern of Poe's symptoms, the delirium, the tremors, the inability to drink water when offered, the periods of consciousness alternating with wild agitation, are consistent with the terminal stage of rabies encephalitis. Rabies can have a long incubation period. It would not have shown signs of the bite, and it would explain the missing week. A man in the early stages of rabies might wander confused, disoriented, unable to account for himself. The man who called out for Reynolds in his final hours. Who was Reynolds? Poe had written admiringly of a man named Jeremiah Reynolds, an explorer who had advocated for a polar expedition. He had mentioned Reynolds in at least one letter. Whether he was calling for this specific Reynolds, or whether the name meant something else entirely, or whether it was simply the delirium speaking, no one knows. No one ever asked him. He died before anyone thought to ask, or before he was coherent enough to answer. There is one more piece of this case that almost no one discusses. Something that happened after Poe's death that may have done more damage to the truth than anything that happened before it. A man named Rufus Wilmot Griswold, Poe's literary executor, and his enemy. 2 days after Poe's death, the New York Daily Tribune published an obituary. It was signed Ludwig. Ludwig turned out to be Rufus Wilmot Griswold, a critic, an anthologist, and a man who had a long, bitter public rivalry with Poe. They had insulted each other in print. They had accused each other of plagiarism and incompetence. They despised each other. Poe, inexplicably, had named Griswold as his literary executor. The obituary Griswold wrote was not a tribute. It was a character assassination. It described Poe as a drunk, a drug addict, a man of no moral character, little better than a fiend. It claimed he was unstable, dishonest, impossible to know or trust. Much of it was fabricated. Griswold later published a longer memoir of Poe in which he forged letters, invented incidents, and constructed a version of Poe's life designed to destroy his reputation permanently. It worked, for decades. The image of Poe as a dissolute, self-destructive drunk persisted largely because Griswold planted it, and because Griswold controlled Poe's literary estate after his death and could shape the primary sources available to subsequent biographers. The reason this matters for the mystery of his death is specific. Griswold's version of Poe, the drunk, the addict, the man who could not control himself, made Cooping seem unnecessary as an explanation. Of course, Poe was found in a gutter in someone else's clothes, the Griswold version implies. He was that kind of man. He drank himself to a stupor and wandered into the wrong place. The Griswold version made the mystery disappear by making Poe responsible for it. But the Poe who left Richmond on September 27th was, by all accounts of people who saw him that day, sober, well-dressed, cheerful, and looking forward to his future. He had recently signed a temperance pledge. Sincerely, friends said. He had a fiancée. He had plans. Something happened to Edgar Allan Poe between September 27th and October 3rd. Something that left him delirious, in strangers' clothes, unable to account for himself, and dead within 4 days. We do not know what it was. At least 26 published theories. 175 years. The most analysed death in American literary history. And no answer. The man who invented the detective story, the genre built on the premise that every mystery has a solution, that the right mind applied to the right evidence will always find the truth, died as a mystery that his own genre cannot solve. There is no Dupin for this case. There is no deduction that closes it. His last words were, "Lord, help my poor soul." Not a confession, not an explanation, not a clue. A prayer. From the man who wrote, "I became insane with long intervals of horrible sanity." From the man who wrote, "All that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream." From the man who wrote, in The Mystery of Marie Roget, "The most trifling events have a bearing upon the investigation, and a seeming insignificance is often a more powerful ally than the most conclusive evidence." He knew how to find the answer. He had spent his life inventing the method. And when it was his own life that needed solving, the method had nothing to work with. No witness, no scene, no evidence from the missing week. Only the gutter, the wrong clothes, the name Reynolds, and 4 days of dying in a language no one could understand. I am Inspector Morrow, and the file remains open. If the darkness suits you, stay, press subscribe. More cases, more questions, more nights with no clean answers.